And I guess I'll turn it over to your attorney, which is Raleigh Hansman. Raleigh, the ball is in your court. You know how this goes. We want to know what's going on and do the same presentation you have in the past.
I submit that that isn't why he was referred, and that as we move forward today, that this board recognizes that the eligibility was determined by Warden Young on 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. But it isn't just Warden Young that deemed Jennis eligible for this consideration. Warden Young referral of Jennis Hofer then went to the Secretary of Corrections, who reviewed the recommendation and made the decision to pass Jennis on to this board. I would submit that Jennis is eligible for this board's consideration, and that today we limit the discussion to the factors that should be considered for compassionate parole instead of debating whether he's eligible. Warden Darren Young and the Secretary of Corrections have deemed him eligible for this consideration. They are the ones that put Jennis before you today, and I ask that you give deference to that decision and the reference that they've made. So your job as board members is to apply 12 separate factors that were brought by the legislatures. Those are found at SBCL 2415A57, and there's 12 of them. I'm not here to say that any one factor is more important than another. I believe each side would have ones that are more in their favor and therefore would say you should really focus on that. But that's not the position I'm taking. Rather, this is a totality analysis. And I ask that this board weigh and apply each of those individual factors when they come to their decision today.
Pardon me, Mr. Chairman, I did have one question for council, very short question. Ms. Hansman, when you commented that there were several referrals to Avera, were those referrals where he actually stayed in the hospital?
Yes, there's an ER visit as well as other visits to the hospital. Without having the full records in front of me, I can't tell you the length of the stay and how long he was there.
But they were overnight?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, yes.
Mr. Hofer doesn't have to provide any testimony, but as a board member, I'd be interested in a one-sentence statement from him describing who he is today.
You want to do that now or you want to do that later?
I just assume do it now if that's all right with Mr. Hofer and his counsel. Could you give us a one-sentence statement describing who you are today?
Today, I'm a mellow, compassionate, tired old person that wants to live in peace with everybody and anybody that I come in contact with. And I want no problems in my life. And I regret what happened. I wish I could change it. They were relatives of mine. I didn't want them gone. I didn't want this to happen. And if I could change it, I definitely would.
Okay, thank you.
So whoever we've got from the AG's office, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, identify yourself, please.
My name is Bob Mayer. I'm a Deputy Attorney General in the Attorney General's office in Pierre. That Jennis Hofer should not be released from prison. My good friend, Raleigh Hansman, kept talking in the terms of a life. And life was always singular. And 36 years might be enough time for somebody who took a life. But in this case, there are 2 lives that are gone, 2 life sentences that were consecutive. Raleigh also mentioned that Mr. Hofer owned this and cooperated completely throughout the time this happened. That isn't so. Mr. Hofer put us through a habeas corpus process where he blamed his lawyers for not doing a good enough job getting murder charges reduced to manslaughter charges. Only then did he plead guilty.
Okay, there are 9 members on the Board of Pardons and Paroles, and we're all present today, and I'm the chairman, but we're going to have a discussion now where we can ask questions of Mr. Hofer or of either one of these two attorneys that are on the line? Any questions? If there are no questions, then I would entertain a motion to either grant or to deny.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Gass.
Yes, I intend to make a motion. Before I do that, I'd like to make some comments.
Go ahead.
It appears to me that the legislative intent was that the board consider these matters on an individual basis. And I think we're doing that. I think the primary factor that comes into my mind at this point is risk to the public. I voted against Mr. Hofer's application a year ago. At this point, I'm convinced that he does not present a substantial risk to the public. Frankly, no disrespect intended, Mr. Hofer, but you're a broken old man, and many of us are well on the way to that. I think that bears on the risk consideration. I don't think that South Dakota sentencing standards bear consideration here. If you don't like South Dakota sentencing standards, don't commit a crime in South Dakota. Several months ago, I had a conversation with a gentleman whose opinion I respect regarding tough cases like this. His advice to me was, use your judgment and vote your conscience. My judgment in this case tells me that Mr. Hofer committed evil acts, that he was prideful, that he kept a list of his enemies, that his goal in life was to get even for alleged offenses, and that he blamed those that he perceived as enemies for his problems. So that's my judgment of Mr. Hofer. That's what my brain says. Mr. Hofer, you deserve everything you get. My conscience, on the other hand, my heart says, Mr. Hofer has changed over the years. He's been in the facility for 30 plus years. He's had absolutely no write-ups. Reviewed his statements and his parole plan. I think he's truly remorseful for what he's done. I think his medical condition bears consideration. I don't think he bears a risk to the public. So while my head tells me he should get everything he deserves, my heart tells me that this is the time for some compassion. So with that, I would move that Mr. Hofer be granted compassionate parole.
Do I have a second to that motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Swanson.
I would echo Mr. Gass's comments in support of the motion. I've tried to make a career of following the law, and the factor that I think weighs most heavily against Mr. Hofer is the criminal behavior that led to the offense. However, that's one of 12 factors that we're supposed to look at, and I think it merits mention that that sole factor about how serious the offense was, and I'm willing to assume for purposes of what we're doing today that the offense was as premeditated and ruthless as the prosecution asserted, as opposed to as spontaneous and sudden as Mr. Hofer asserted at the time that the case was going on. However, of significant note to me is in that same section 5 of the statute where the offense behavior is discussed, chronicity is discussed as well. In my view, chronicity is meant to refer to how repetitive or common the criminal behavior was. And by any accounts, whether Mr. Hofer was a disagreeable gentleman involved in an inexcusable fight over water drainage or not, there is no indication of chronicity of criminal behavior. So even that one factor that weighs against him in my mind also weighs in his favor because of the lack of any other criminal history. That said, I won't drone on for hours, but I second Mr. Gass's motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Gass, seconded by Mr. Swanson to grant compassionate parole. Is there any additional discussion from the board before I call for a vote?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Leitenberg.
I understand compassion. I understand compassionate parole. I understand the statutes. I understand the record. I've reviewed it all. But I also understand compassion to victims. Victims who have not had the chance to spend time with their loved one for all of these years. Victims whose loved ones have never had the chance to experience COVID, but also have never had the chance to experience watching their children grow up and their grandchildren being born. So my compassion is with the victim in this case, and I can't support the motion because of that.
Any other discussion from board members before we call the vote?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Austin?
as I read the statute, even when an inmate is eligible for compassionate parole, the statute still grants the board wide discretion in whether or not to grant that. I also recognize the difficulty of being asked to exercise compassion as a board member to someone that failed utterly to exercise that same compassion when he committed a truly heinous crime. That being said, the statute, in my mind, the statute evinces an intent that at some point, the public's interest in safety at some point can be outweighed by the cost, both in terms of real dollars and staff resources to achieve that safety. And I think we've reached that point here in this case. Mr. Hofer is requiring a significant amount of staff resources to manage his conditions. And it's an expensive process as well. I don't think COVID is a deciding factor here, but I'm not unmindful that this case is occurring at a time when staff resources are already stretched. So I feel as a safeguard and a guardian of tax sources here, the cost to keep Mr. Hofer incarcerated does not equal any public interest in safety here. So, and for that reason, I will be voting in favor of the motion.
Any other discussion by board members? Again, one more time, any other discussion by board members? When we do an electronic meeting or electronic interview, we also have to do an electronic vote. And so we will call the roll to make sure we have the vote recorded correctly. So Stacy or Tracy, would you please call the roll?
Chairman, I'm going to call the roll. This is Karina.
Karina, that's fine. Go ahead.
Board Member Whitehorse Sarda.
Nay.
Board Member Austin.
Aye.
Board Member Leitenberg.
No.
Board Member Lieberman.
I'm just going to take about 15 seconds and explain my vote. I think that murder is one of those offenses where you cannot seek forgiveness because those you would seek forgiveness from are no longer on this earth. So I do believe it's an unforgivable crime. And absent the 2018 bill, I would never grant parole to this gentleman for taking 2 lives and destroying many other lives by his act. But given the 2018 legislative enactment, I do believe that the facts of this case fall squarely within that statute, and therefore I will vote aye.
Board Member Gass.
Aye.
Pardon me, I didn't hear it. Yes.
Aye.
Board Member Schroyer.
Aye.
Board Member Swanson.
Aye.
Vice Chair Elders.
No.
Chairman Rowe.
No.
5-4, the board.
Yeah, but Mr. Hofer, you've got the votes. It's on a 5-4, so you will be granted parole.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much. Appreciate it so much, and my family does too.
Okay, that'll end the hearing.